introduce our next speaker here. Considered by, feared by many in the Department of Ecology, one of the great freedom fighters, and somebody who's unafraid and willing to stand up for your freedoms and property rights in Olympia, and who is oftentimes a great person to propose all kinds of bills for legislative reform and for administrative reform and dealing with all the issues that face this organization and many of the fights that we have around the state. Somebody who really knows this law really well. I've talked to many people who work in state government, and they oftentimes say that Representative Taylor is one of the people who really knows this stuff really well. If they're on the other side, that means they fear him, and if they're on our side, they love him. And we need more people like this in Olympia, and it's my honor to introduce Representative David Taylor, talking about what is and we will have a little bit of a Q&A, I think, towards the later half of that. We don't have an extra mic, so you'll have to yell it out, and he knows the drill. So thank you so much.
Boy, it's tough to come up after an introduction like that. Thank you. And thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure, it's an honor. I was honored earlier this year to receive the Representative of the Year award from Citizens Alliance of Property Rights, so which was very humbling, and it's my way of giving back, I guess, to come and talk Hirst. We're going to work through some history. How did we get here? I'm going to give you some of my background, and then we're going to get to some Q&A, because I find you actually have the better questions. I can tell you what I think, but it's your questions that generate thought and generate potentially solutions, which is why I have my notepad with me. So who am I, right? In 1994, I went to work right here in Kittitas County. I was born and raised here in Ellensberg. And in groups like this, I got to be really careful, because I was a planner. I was a county planner. In 1997, I was hired at 25 to be the county planning director. Yeah, so I'm that guy. So in 1994, we were in the middle of growth management planning. We were doing agricultural lands of long-term commercial significance. And a family friend of mine came in, and some of you have been around the property rights, water rights fighting for a while. You may know the name Mary Burke. And she was Aunt Mary to me. I was the best man at her grandnephew's wedding, close personal family friends. And she says to me, David, how can a nice boy like you be involved in something like this? Okay. I'm fresh out of college, and I'm going, the impact that had on my life was, I had to reevaluate everything I thought. Here I am thinking I'm doing the right thing, and Mary Burke, of all people, says, how can you be involved in this? And so my educated response was, well, Mary, it's to protect you. And her response was, who's going to protect me from you? So fast forward a couple of years, and we get into some water law questions, and I said, Mary, what does water law, what Western water law, Washington State water law say about this? And she says, I don't know, you tell me. So I spent the next 2 weeks reading water law. And I actually broke it down and summarized each individual section, and I handed it to her in a notebook, and a couple days later she handed it back to me with red ink and said, you're right with some corrections. And that was my introduction to water law. So, how did we get here, right? I cut my teeth in water law in 1997 when then Attorney General Gregoire issued opinion number 6. And opinion number 6 said, when you're using exempt wells for subdivisions specifically, or short subdivisions, land divisions, the cumulative amount that you can use is 5,000 gallons a day. And being the creative people that we are, we said, okay, perfect, well, we're going to put them in different names and tell the applicants to put these in different names and different LLCs, and then they're different people. And the opinion had said, same person, same time, same place, limited to 5,000 gallons a day. So we got creative. Campbell Gwynn happened, which was a lawsuit out of Yakima. Supreme Court said, no, it's cumulative 5,000 gallons a day. We agree with the AGO, same time, same place. And again, we found a workaround. POSMA then happens, there was the erratus, there was the threat of a lawsuit here in Kittitas County, and I say threat because there was nothing ever filed, and yet ecology moved forward with the moratorium, and in my humble opinion didn't follow proper notice in that, which I can give you that information later if you're interested. That's kind of the lead-in to where we got here, and you have to, when you start thinking of Hirst, you have to actually go back to 1990 with the passage of the Growth Management Act, and you have to start looking at how that interplays within the GMA itself and the amendments that have happened to the GMA from the point that it started to where we're at today, and what's been added to critical areas ordinances, what's been added to protect surface and groundwater, what's been added as additional burdens on the counties. And I was at an event last week and I was talking GMA, and there were blank stares from the audience. And I said, well, hold on. So let me guess, you're thinking, why is this guy here today talking about GMA? We want to know about Hirst. And if any of you are thinking that today, it's because the Hirst decision is a GMA decision. Whatcom County et al. V. Western Washington Growth Management Hearings Boards. There is nothing in the Hirst decision that invalidated exempt well law in Washington State. Nothing. It doesn't invalidate 9044-050 at all. A permit exempt wells means permit exempt. There is no permit. You can drill a well subject to the limitations outlined in law. 5,000 gallons a day for single group domestic wells, 5,000 gallons a day for industrial commercial development, stock water uses. Those are permit exempt uses. And nothing in the Hirst decision changed that. You see, since about 1997, there's, and we all know who they are, there's groups out there that have tried to limit rural development. Because, GMA says we should have everybody living in a city because we want to drive through where they used to live to see the beautiful nature, but we don't want you actually living and working in those areas. We just want to see it as we drive. They couldn't accomplish it through water law. They couldn't get there. So they turned to GMA. That's why we now have hearings boards decisions and court decisions that say that rural is 5 acres in size. No, rural is what rural is, and it might be a 1 acre lot, it might be a 3 acre lot. That should be a locally developed plan and locally developed standards, but instead we have a court decision. That's how they got to where they are today. They've abandoned the use of water law to do it, now they've embraced the GMA to get ultimately where they want to go. The Hirst decision is, in my humble opinion, I'm not an attorney, you're going to hear from an attorney later, fatally flawed. It ignores Western water law, it ignores decades of water law in Washington State. It is fatally flawed. And yet, it's not a water decision, it's a GMA decision. And that's what's made this so, one of the things that's made this so difficult to solve is, as folks like me say, this is simple, guys. You want to fix Hirst, if you want to address Hirst in Washington State, it's a simple bill, 3 sections. Section 1 amends 1927, RCW 1927, which is the state building code. Section 2 amends RCW 3678, GMA. Section 3 amends 5817, which is the state subdivision code. And you simply say, counties can rely on ecology rules, and they can rely on well reports as proof of potable water when issuing a building permit or approving a subdivision. That's all it takes. Hirst is done. We go back to essentially the day before the Hirst decision and we move forward. But yet all you hear about is we have to address water. We have to address exempt well use. Folks, this is not a policy problem in Washington State. The policy on this is simple. 1 bill, 3 sections. Very few words. This is a political issue. This is about control. I've been saying now for the 20 plus years I've been in land use and property rights and water rights that this is about controlling water, which controls land, which controls people. That's what this is about. This isn't about public. Annual consumptive use of all the exempt wells in Washington State is less than 1% annual consumptive use. Less than 1%. So as our cities grow and continue to move forward and have economic development and have residential development, they draw water from the same aquifers or the same water bodies that our rural residents can't. This is about political control. Because guess who lives in cities? Typically. It's not me. And it's typically not my party. And I don't want to get into politics here, but we're only a couple years away from redistricting again. Big picture. Keep it in mind. So, I'm going to catch up on my notes here. I apologize. One of the things that was discussed in Hirst and was kind of the key to the Hirst decision was the relationship of in-stream flows versus consumptive use outside, which may impact in-stream flows. So, by way of background, in-stream flows are essentially the reserved water right held by Washington State. And the assumption that everybody in government likes to use is that if you drill a well, you're going to impact in-stream flows if there's connectivity. If you're in an unconfined aquifer, your withdrawal of groundwater will impact in-stream flows. Again, that's actually a simple solution, but which I'll come to. The fact of the matter is, let's assume that they do impair. Let's assume that all wells impair in-stream flows. Who owns those in-stream flows? Well, you do. The people of Washington do. They're owned by Washington State, and as the water right holder, we can allow impairment. We can do that. Very simple solution, and I'll circle back to that here in a second. The one thing that I do want to say about in-stream flows is if you or I want to develop a water right in Washington State, we have to do some very specific things. We make application, and then if we get what essentially amounts to preliminary approval, we construct, we drill, we build the works. We then have to physically divert the water, and we have to put that water to beneficial use. None of that occurs with an in-stream flow. And if that's the case, then an in-stream flow right is an inferior right, in my opinion. And again, I'm not an attorney. You'll hear from the water attorney next. I do get to play an attorney 60 to 105 days a year, on TV sometimes, in Olympia. But I'm not an attorney. In-stream flows are inferior rights. And we're now using those in-stream flows as the basis to reject the use of exempt wells. The other thing to keep in mind on in-stream flows is they are actually junior to other rights. Western water law, first in time, first in right. That's the very basic premise. When those in-stream flows were established in the 90s, in 2000, 2005, whenever they came in to rule through the Department of Ecology, they are inferior rights to other rights because people have been withdrawing water for decades and over 100 years in Washington State. They are senior to that in-stream flow. And so ecology likes to say that they really don't have any idea of how many exempt wells are out there, and my response is, well, cool, because it means I've got tens of thousands, according to you, exempt wells that are senior in right to your exempt well, or to your in-stream flow right. Which means I can also, under water law, move that water. And under the water law at that time, when that water was put to beneficial use, I could withdraw up to 5,000 gallons a day. So I'm going to move on. And I'm going to allow economic development to happen. That's going to be the next fight, folks. Mark my words on that. So October happens, Hirst Decision's filed. My colleagues and I begin looking at legislation on how can we address this. And of course, there's the easy solution of one bill, 3 sections, that was introduced by my seatmate, Bruce Chandler, later in the session, because the first thing we wanted to do was send some shots across the bow. So some of the bills that we introduced, Representative Shea introduced a bill that had a rebuttable presumption of no impairment, meaning you could still drill wells and it was up to the state to prove that you were going to impair. The assumption is there is no impairment. That bill didn't go anywhere. We had the bill because, again, in-stream flow rights are inferior rights. We had a bill to not only declare that, but to reassert our constitutional statements and say that water for irrigation, commercial, industrial use, and power use is superior rights, again, pursuant to the state constitution, and allow impairment. That didn't happen. I'm not even sure that bill got a hearing. One of the bills that we introduced was to look at what's the state invested over the last 20 years in water? There should be an accounting of that, right? We should know, we've been facing water issues now since really, well, forever, but use 1997 as the benchmark when AGO number 6 was published. How much money have we invested as the taxpayers of Washington in water resources all across the state? $795 million. That doesn't include what your local governments are doing. That does not include all of the federal money that's been invested. So the question is, if they want mitigation, if one of the pushes from the environmental interest and from future lies as I like to call them, oh, come on. This is CAPR. I must have mumbled. I didn't say it clearly. There we go. Yeah, I lost my train of thought. Mitigation. They're talking about mitigation, right? We got to mitigate all these exempt wells. We want higher fees when you drill a well in order to provide mitigation in kind, in same place, water for water. We spent $800 million over 20 years in mitigation. We've already mitigated for 1% of annual consumptive use across the state. I think we paid that bill. That bill didn't get a hearing. Folks from Whatcom County, Representative Buys put a bill in that said we need to look at assessment of actual return flows, depending on who you ask and which hydrogeologist. Some will say the return flow from exempt well use is 50%. Others will say it's as high as 70%. Let's be conservative. 50%. If I'm withdrawing 400 gallons a day, 200 gallons of that's going back into the ground. Are we really talking about true impacts here, or are we talking about control? Finally, this gets us to kind of where we're at. The last bill was Senator Warnick's Bill 5239, and that's been the bill that you've all read about in either the op-eds, the editorials, the various articles. That's been the vehicle now of moving forward with some sort of solution, and how do we get there? I would note that the Senate passed that bill 4 times this year. 4 different times. And they actually amended it several times too in an effort to show a willingness to meet, I don't want to say compromise, because it truly wasn't a compromise, but it was a willingness to hear the concerns and try to address them without impacting property owners. 4 times. You want to know how many times the House of Representatives voted on a Hirst fix? 0. Not a single vote in the House to fix Hirst. They wouldn't even vote on their own bills because they did not want the debate. They were going to get owned. I'm just going to tell you right now. It happens that my caucus, House Republican caucus, represents rural areas. We happen to know people who know water, and we would have had the arguments to completely dismantle their supposed solution of an 18-month fix or a 24-month temporary fix, because they're not fixes. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on that to try to explain what the issue is there. Anybody here from Skagit? There we go. Folks, if you've never looked at the Skagit Basin, go look at it. The 2013 Swinomish decision, there's now 550 homes that are partially or fully built that in some cases have wells drilled that cannot use water. 550, and that's rounded. It's probably a little low. But that's what Washington State as a whole is now facing. Think about that. When you say we're going to give you an 18-month fix, we're going to essentially ignore the court decision for 18 months or 24 months, depending on which bill that you want to talk about. What you're saying is we're going to ignore the decision, but we're never going to be able to provide you legal water during that time period. You're always going to have clouded water. Your water use, it's the next court decision. Yep, okay, yeah, you're right. The legislature said you could move forward for the next 18 months, but they didn't say you get legal water. And we end up with a whole other Skagit Basin issue. It's not a fix. And when was the last time the legislature passed something that said we'll come back to it in 18 months and actually did it? McCleary, anybody? That started in 2009. They liked it, the legislature as a whole liked to kick the can down the road, temporary solution for political gain, and then just keep either kicking the can or refusing later to do anything about it. So, on June 29th-ish, my leadership team came to me and said, we need you to start negotiating Hirst. And I said, okay, I'll do that. And I had been involved in the meetings before that, but we had reached the point where they needed to bring in fresh eyes and try to kickstart the negotiations. And on June 30th, we had actually, through a negotiation directly with Maya Bellin, the director of the Department of Ecology, come up with a bipartisan solution that has been referred to as the Taylor-Blake Amendment. If you're from the South Peninsula area, Brian Blake, Democrat from the 19th, he and I co-sponsored that amendment. And what that amendment did, I'm going to be brutally honest with you. It's online, you can go look at it. I didn't like all of it. It recognized that there are limitations in certain basins due to adjudication or a court decision that have necessitated additional requirements, for example, well use. It's existing law. It is what it is. If we want to unwind that, we can. That's going to be a heck of a lot longer fight. It included a fee. It included a fee increase on exempt wells. It was $300, and then if with the legislature didn't fund money in the capital budget, that fee would actually go up. We actually put the money in the capital budget, so I felt fairly confident that we were okay there. And then the give that we made was to say, Department of Ecology, you must consult with the tribes who have a vested interest in water law and water use in Washington State because of fish. Water flows for fish, so you need to consult with them on a government basis. Put that on the bar, ready to move it, and then everything fell apart. And by everything, I mean literally everything. We've got Representative Dye, Representative Maycomer here, Representative Schmick. We were on the floor on June 30th, the entire day, and I don't think we actually voted on more than 2 bills. We left at about 3 a.m. on Saturday. There's all sorts of speculation as to what happened, but the fact of the matter is we had a bipartisan solution that we could actually live with that would have allowed property owners to begin drilling tomorrow because there was an emergency clause. And it fell apart. So then we all went home for a week. And during that time, we actually put together, working with Senator Warnick, a new proposal based upon that amendment, the Taylor-Blake Amendment, to try to, again, reach across the aisle to say, look, we're not going to compromise on exempt well use, but we can try to help. We understand your concerns, we can try to get you there. And we gave them another revised amendment on the 14th, Friday. On the 18th, back in Olympia, negotiating, putting more offers on the table, trying to find language. On the 19th, everybody walked away. And so now, that was the end of the third special session, 193 days. So we're now in limbo. What's going to happen? Where are we at? We are continuing negotiations. We're still having the discussions. We met on August 9th. I don't want to overstate this. We are meeting. We are having discussions. Nothing's happening. Brutally honest, that's the way I am. Nothing's happening. This week we are attempted to jumpstart the conversation yet again. We'll see what happens. My personal opinion on this is the Democrats do have no intention of bringing anybody back or talking water law until after the special election of the 45th. They think they're going to win it, and when they do, they take over the Senate, and they will just ram something through and dare us to vote against the capital budget and a bond vote, which I'm okay with because I vote against every single capital budget. Every one of them in 9 years. I will never vote for a capital budget because they always include somewhere in the neighborhood of $150 million of land purchases and water rate purchases. Roughly. This year was $140 million. And until we eliminate that, I won't vote for that. So, before we get into questions, I realized that I forgot to touch on something. There's incredible debate right now statewide as to, well, what does Hirst really apply to? Who does it really apply to? This was a hearings board decision out of Whatcom County. It obviously applies to Whatcom County, but who else does it apply to? And there's some that say it only applies to GMA counties that actually have what are called critical fish basins. So, in-stream flow rules, critical fish flows. It's limited to those areas. There's others that say this is a GMA decision, therefore it applies to GMA counties, in all of them, regardless of what the basins look like as far as fish flows. There's some that argue that no, this actually applies to all counties that have critical fish basins, regardless of whether they're GMA or not. But if you don't have fish flows, critical fish basins, then it doesn't apply. And finally, there are those that say this applies statewide. I fall under the last one, this applies statewide. Yes, it was a GMA decision. Yes, we have non-GMA planning counties. All of that is true. The decision, the way the law is written, under 3670A, I think it's in 070, it says critical areas and servicing groundwater resources in a single section. Every county in the state of Washington must adopt a critical areas ordinance, even if you're a non-GMA county. I believe that this is a decision that is of statewide significance. I believe it affects every property, rural property owner, undeveloped property owner in Washington state. And I would point to the fact that the court relied on RCW 5817, State Subdivision Code, and 1927, State Building Code, as the basis to render their decision. Those codes apply statewide. And if you don't follow all that and don't buy into all of that thought process, let me tell you that this week in the Okanagan, the Yakima Nation filed a lawsuit against the approval of a building permit that relies on a well drilled in 1991. Okanagan County is a non-GMA county. Even if you're in a county that does not do full GMA planning, it's coming. This issue is coming. And I'm very happy to have CAPR having this today and spending what amounts to probably an hour and a half worth of talk on water law. This is coming. This Mark Twain. Everybody loves Mark Twain. He said, "Whiskey's for drinking, water's for fighting." That's where we're at. And there are folks in this state that have been in the fight on water law for decades. And unfortunately, we're not getting new, fresh ideas and new, fresh people into that fight because water law is complicated. And it's a very specialized field. So if you got any grandkids or kids that are interested in being attorneys, tell them water law. Because it's going to be, you're always going to have clients, and everybody's going to continue to fight over water. We have about 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes left. I want to open it up to Q&A, ask a question, and I'll repeat it as best I can. And you know what, before I get there, and we'll get right to you. I mentioned Representatives Maycomer and Dye. So, because this is a GMA decision, this should go through the Environment Committee in the House of Representatives. You've got, what, 3/4 of that committee here today. That's how important this issue is for us. Representative Maycomer is my assistant, I'm ranking, she's my assistant ranking, and Representative Dye sits on the committee along with Representative Bias. Am I missing anybody? Okay, I have to laugh. We have a great team on that committee, and I would encourage you to talk to them because they're very passionate about this. Of course, talk to Joe. Joe's passionate too, but he doesn't sit on my committee, so I think he's happy about that.
But you don't have to sit on healthcare.
That's right. No healthcare. Yes, Jacqueline does. Question?
Yeah, Center for Environmental Law and Policy, health, has involved themselves in the Columbia River Treaty issue. I expect that they will attempt to kill exempt wells through that. Is there some formation from the caucus on inserting counties and willing counties and the caucus itself into the Columbia River Treaty negotiations, especially given that the administration in D.C. is trying to devolve power out to the state and local levels?
The simple answer is yes. We have my seatmate, Representative Chandler, my Senator Jim Honeyford. Oh, I'm sorry. The question was, are there any attempts or will there be attempts to interject House Republican caucus or the counties into the process of the Columbia River Treaty negotiations that are sort of starting. They've been sort of ongoing now for a year or two, but it's up, I think, in 2020. And those negotiations are going to really start kicking up. So the answer to that is we have people who have been involved in that for the last 2 or 3 years. Representative Chandler, Senator Jim Honeyford, really been taking the lead on that, but there's others that are definitely interested in it. That falls under the Ag Natural Resources Committee. I would encourage you to get a hold of Representative Buys, who's our ranking member, but you're absolutely right. At a minimum, the legislature, members of the legislature need to be involved and understand what's going there in order to protect the property owners that they represent. But more importantly, the counties need to be at the table because they are the ones, whether Hirst exists or not, they're the ones that are on the ground every single day and have a vested interest in making sure that the water resources as a whole in their counties can continue to be used in order to have not only residential growth but economic development. Right behind you first.
Yes. I'm Karen from Washington County, and I try to represent well owners up there, and it's a horrible position. And it's not a question, and I'm sorry. We also have up there the public health department through the state is also coming in through the back door and trying to take through shared wells and other things, control of wells also. So you've got another head in there. Are you guys addressing that at all? Or are you aware of it? I'm assuming you are aware of it.
The question was, local departments of health have interjected themselves into the discussion, especially through shared wells, and are doing some limitations on the use of those shared wells. Did I capture that sufficiently?
Pretty much.
Okay.
I can give you specifics later.
Okay. The simple answer is not specifically aware of what Whatcom County is doing, but under the law, group domestic wells that withdraw less than, or that have less than 14 hookups are Class B water systems. And a Class B water system does not require water right, but they are regulated. And they're regulated from the standpoint of water quality, which in about 1999, I think, the state passed what are called satellite management agency legislation, which puts some of the management of those group domestic systems under the Department of Health, local Department of Health purview, and then use those agencies for data collection, et cetera. The fact that when you drill down into this is exactly what AGO number 6 in 1997 was about. Because once again, there's some of us out there that think, okay, if we want to truly protect water quality, groundwater quality, the easiest way to do that is to not have 100 new straws into the ground. So actually encourage the use of group domestic systems, deregulate those, reform the entire process, have one straw that serves 10 homes. If you're worried about water quality, that's one of the ways to deal with it. You're still less than 5,000 gallons a day. you meet the intent of the law, this works. This isn't about meeting the intent of the law. This isn't about protecting water quality. This is about controlling people's ability to utilize their land. And we're aware that, the short answer is we're aware of it. I don't know of any jurisdiction that is acting outside of their legal constraints. But we can talk and we'll talk after this and look at Whatcom.
Whatcom County doesn't recognize, or doesn't make them, doesn't recognize that classification up there. So they are considered, well, non-class, a shared rental sign.
Let's talk, because it would depend on the number of hookups.
I'm from Whatcom County as well. I sit on the Water Association Board, and I'm also on the WIRA program. And the question has to do with WIRA. My understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, that when the Clean Water Act was brought in, it allowed the state to say, do you want a federal program or do you want a state program? Which one do you want to create in your state? Washington went to the direction of allowing the planning of the resource to be dumped down to the county level, hence the water resource inventory areas. And my observation working in the WIRA up in Whatcom County is that it is a target for the county to disassemble and neuter that capability to plan the resource. Do you have a comment on that?
Absolutely. The question was, do I have a comment on the use of watershed planning to control the resource and essentially undermine local planning efforts? Is that close? Perfect. Elaine, how does the Clean Water Act play into that? The Clean Water Act passed in 1972. Watershed planning passed in 1999. Therein lies part of the problem. You're, in my opinion, having been representative of an initiating government as part of WIRA 37, 38, and 39 in the Yakima Basin, watershed planning, the intent is to fully integrate that into the growth management plan. That's the intent. And the minute that you do that, you're going to limit economic development, rural development, and water use. It will happen. Because go back to the original law as it passed in 1999. Watershed planning is water quantity, water quality, habitat, and in-stream flows. The minute that you say that groundwater use is going to impact in-stream flows or habitat, because of the internal consistency requirements of the Growth Management Act, they are essentially required to limit the growth in rural areas.
Excuse me. I didn't see it that way. There are 14 requirements under the Growth Management Act, and we consistently see that these are cherry-picked to minimize the amount of growth in rural area.
Oh, absolutely.
That is not Growth Management Act. That is usurpation of a law.
Oh, I don't disagree at all.
Okay.
The follow-up was the Growth Management Act has 14 goals within it that as you're planning, you try to meet those. And you can, under case law, local jurisdictions are supposed to be allowed to prioritize those 14 goals. And to be clear, it's 13 goals in the GMA, and then all the goals under the Shoreline Management Act is integrated into GMA, happened in 1995. You're right, it's cherry picked. You get resources, you get future lives, you get an organization that walks in, an NGO that says they prioritize property rights over critical areas, and they shouldn't have done it. And here's the science that says they shouldn't have done it. And the hearings board, which by the way is a partisan governor-appointed zero accountability board, says you're right, they should have prioritized critical areas over property rights, even though property rights are specifically enumerated. And then it goes to court. And well, we should have a GMA discussion, because here's the problem, and I'm running out of time. When a county makes a decision, that decision is supposed to be given deference. That decision is the right decision. And it's up to the appellants to show that the decision is wrong. So then, the hearings board says, county, you were wrong. In my opinion, they don't get deference. The hearings board says, county, you're wrong. It goes to court. The hearings board decision is then given deference. So as a county, and we've got a former county commissioner here, former county commissioner right here in Ellensberg, Bruce Coe, talk to him. He's lived through this nightmare as a county commissioner. This thing is designed to hurt property owners. I firmly believe that.
Gloria Clark from Spokane County. I read all 1,000-page documents in our county discussing water banking, which is of course connected to the Hirst agreement. It actually said we're going to give cows 12 gallons a day. Any farmer here knows that's not enough water. And 185 with mitigation. And DOE, right on their website, it said that they want to turn every county, it will eventually have an in-stream flow rule, which means it's going to impact everybody, not just Wyver 55 where I live. I think the biggest disaster is any politician that believes that water banking is the solution, which of course Yakima was one of the first counties or first areas in our state to do this. It is connected to UNESCO, the United Nations. It is an international scam for equity, social equity, because why should you have 5,000 gallons a day when I can live on 185 gallons a day? But I tell you, when I moved to my place where we live in the country, we lived on less than a quarter of a gallon a day, which is about, if I remember right, I mean, it's right around less than 300 gallons a day. That's not enough water for a family of four, especially if you have a teenage daughter. So I just want you to know, from my research, water banking is a disaster. I'd like to hear what you have to say about it, Dave.
So the question is water banking, in my opinion on it. I hate water banks. And to clarify, it was actually Kittitas County that had one of the first water banks after I left. Yakima County is going a completely different direction, trying to establish a groundwater utility where they can charge people on an annual basis for water consumption, which I also oppose. Water banking. Anytime you make water a commodity, you're artificially inflating the price. Water has a value on the open market, and I own a water right. I have a certificated water right. I have the ability to sell that water right. I have the ability to move that water right, change the use, change the time of use, change the purpose of use. I can do that all under existing law. Water banking creates a whole new set of problems, because the minute that the government starts mandating water banking, what happens when the government buys land? They're buying it for more money than it's actually worth, because well, it's your money and they don't care. The same thing happens with water. In the sense of an agricultural production, the water is going to become too expensive to buy from your neighbor and expand your operation or go to a more water-intensive use as far as crops, or going from dry land to irrigated agriculture. It's a nightmare scenario, and what it ultimately is going to lead to is widespread metering, because how else do you control the use of water but through metering? It's the excuse that they'll use to get to metering, frankly. And you're making water a commodity, and that has long-term problems with it in Washington State. I'm no fan of water banking. Now, as a water right holder, if I want to go do a water bank, okay, keep government out of it. The minute that you keep government out of it, it might actually work in certain basins. The minute that the government gets involved, it's going to be too expensive, too cumbersome, and provide no predictability or flexibility to landowners. Welcome to government. That's what it does. I got time for one more.
I heard educated information that there's a possibility of the vote being brought from the floor at the House level, and I heard there was a settlement was going to be later in the month of October. Is that going to happen? And B, how can we support that action happening?
That is a great question, a wonderful one to end on. The question is, what rumors are in October, floor session, special session for Hirst fix, and how can the people be involved to help get that to happen? I would say at this point, it's not going to happen in October. I honestly don't think that it could, but I don't think it will. I honestly believe this thing's going to play out in probably December because of the election in the 45th. Now, if the Republican Senate maintains control, then we could be back in November. If they do not, then the Democrats have to wait until the election's certified to bring us back, because Dino Rossi is a temporary appointment, which would put us into essentially that first week of December. there's multiple ways this could play out. And it all depends on what happens in the 45th. Either nothing happens and we go into January and look for a fix and continue the discussions, or the Democrats get control, they ram through a temporary fix and then start through the capital budget. If the Republicans maintain control and they bring us back, they would pass the same bill for the 5th time and negotiations would continue. So, crystal ball's a little foggy on this. It's not a good, clear answer. But at this point, we don't know how this is going to play out. How you can help. That's the biggest question of the day. Contact your representatives. Send them an email. Make the phone call. Tell them your story. You're a property owner. This is a generational problem. I got farmers whose kids want to come back to the farm all over the state of Washington who now can't because they can't drill a well to put the second home on the property that's been in the family for decades. Tell them your story. Because when I get up on the floor, or Joe, or Jacqueline, or Mary, and we get permission to read from an email, and we say, this is from Bruce in Kittitas County, Representative Taylor, and he lays it out. I may say every one of those words the exact same way, but I'm not saying it. Bruce in Kittitas County is saying it. And that has an impact. I've watched it happen. I've watched debates stop on the House floor because of an email somebody got from a constituent.
My comment was that, part of my comment was that the motion would go not through the speaker, but come from the floor. And I know that's very rare that that happens.
Oh, we make motions like that all the time. We're in a minority. We made the threat on July 20th. We made that threat. The Democrats' response was to send everybody home, because then we don't have a majority of members present to convene the legislative session. We do that several times a year. We make a motion. It's going to take being gavelled in, and even then it's a non-debatable motion. Mr. Speaker, I move pursuant to House rules, we immediately consider Senate Bill 5239. That's the motion. No debate on the motion. It's an up or down vote. People don't, the general public, the few people that actually watch TVW, they have no idea what's happening. So tell your story. I firmly believe that's going to have a bigger impact. And I'm 5 minutes over. I apologize. Thank you all for having me, and God bless you.
Thank you, Representative Taylor. I think there should be no doubt as to why Representative Taylor was our Legislator of the Year, and we're very blessed to have him and many of these other legislators fighting this battle in Olympia for us.